The clink of silver against porcelain was the only sound left in the dining room. Then, without warning, my daughter Alyssa rose from her chair. "We've decided we won't keep supporting you anymore, Mom." Her voice cut through the silence like glass breaking. For a moment, no one moved. Across the table, her husband Ryan leaned back with that smug half-smile he wore whenever he felt in control. My son, Ethan, didn't look up. He just shifted in his chair, pretending to study the tablecloth. I sat at the far end, my own table, my own home, but somehow I felt like a guest in it, 67 years old, and suddenly a stranger among my own children. Alyssa folded her arms and tilted her head, her tone clipped and rehearsed. "It's not personal. It's just time you learn to manage on your own. We can't keep paying for everything." "Everything," she said, as though I were some dependent stranger bleeding her dry. Ryan nodded, eager to add his piece. "You're old enough to know the value of money, Margaret. Groceries, bills, even the gardener. It's becoming too much. You need to start living within your means." My hands rested quietly in my lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. If they were expecting tears or outrage, they would be disappointed. Ethan finally spoke, still not meeting my eyes. "Mom, we love you, but we have our own families now. You can't expect us to keep carrying you." Carrying me. That was the word they all liked to use lately, as if I were a weight dragging their lives down. I looked around the table. The candles flickered softly, their light catching the crystal glasses. All of it paid for with money they believed was theirs. Every fork, every flower, every polished inch of this house came from the very fortune they assumed they were sharing with me. My phone buzzed gently in my pocket. I didn't reach for it, but I knew what it was, a reminder from my financial manager. The monthly transfers, the ones they received, not me. Alyssa continued, satisfied with her little speech. "So from now on, we won't be covering your expenses. You'll have to take care of your own prescriptions, groceries, everything." I nodded once, slowly. "I see," was all I said. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. I could almost hear the sound of their self-importance filling the room, the pride of people who believed they were finally free of a burden. Ryan reached for his wine and smirked. "This is for the best. You'll thank us later." I smiled faintly, though they didn't notice. They thought they were teaching me a lesson, that cutting me off would humble me, remind me of my place. But the truth was, every luxury they flaunted, every comfort they enjoyed, came from one place, me, my investments, my trust, my quiet years of work they'd long forgotten. I looked at them one by one, my daughter with her designer dress, my son with his new watch, both of them so certain of their power. And in that quiet moment, I realized how far they had drifted, how blind they had become. I didn't argue, I didn't defend, I just let them talk, because soon, very soon, words would no longer be necessary. They believed they were cutting me off, but they had no idea. They were living on what I allowed them to have. Alyssa didn't sit back down after the announcement. She hovered at the head of the table like a judge waiting for the guilty to confess. "Mom," she said, smoothing the skirt of her dress as if dignity lived in the fabric, "you have to start learning independence. It's not healthy to rely on us the way you have been. You understand that, right?" Her tone was sweetened the way medicine is sweetened for a child. It still burned going down. Ryan leaned forward, with his elbows on the table, wedding band flashing, as he folded his hands like a pastor about to pray. "We love you," he said, that patient, practiced voice he uses when he thinks he's being noble. "But this can't go on. We're drowning in responsibilities." Responsibilities. The old mansion candlelight threw a gold line across his watch face. Not just any watch, this season's model. The one with the tiny crown etched on the dial. I knew because I'd approved the charge the day it was bought. The trust paid for that watch, my trust. I let my gaze drift, slow and steady, to Alyssa's ears. The diamond studs swallowed light and spat it back in tiny, cold stars. I remembered the email subject line, "Alyssa's milestone, happy to cover?" That was years ago. Every year had another milestone. The diamonds had never stopped growing. Ethan pushed his glass in circles on the table, silent, eyes on the condensation ring he was carving into the wood. He had his father's jaw, but none of his father's backbone. His wife, Grace, had declined to come tonight. Headache, childcare, something. Or maybe she knew what was staged for this evening and didn't want to play a part in it. Alyssa lifted her wine glass, stared at the color as though examining a jewel. "We made a list," she said, and the practiced cruelty arrived on cue. "Prescriptions, that's on you now. Groceries, you'll have to shop smarter. The gardener and the cleaning service, those are luxuries, Mom. And repairs? If something breaks, you'll need to save for it like everyone else." "Like everyone else," Ryan repeated with gentle gravity, and it would have sounded touching if his fingers hadn't drifted to stroke the bezel of that watch. "It's time to tighten belts all around," Alyssa added. "We also think you should sell the piano. It just sits there. You could get a decent price. And the extra bedroom furniture? List it. There's an app." Their faces were earnest, almost tender, as if generosity lived in the act of telling me what to give up. Their sympathy was the kind that doesn't cost anything. My hands stayed folded in my lap, one thumb resting lightly over the other. The napkin lay clean across my knees. I didn't reach for my glass. I didn't reach for anything. Inside, I watched the scene the way you watch a play from the balcony, far enough away to see the lighting cues, the blocking, the lines they'd rehearsed in a living room somewhere that wasn't this one. I could almost hear Alyssa's directing voice. "When I say independence, you nod. When I say we love you, you put your hand on mine." "Ethan, don't argue. Just look wounded. It sells the moment." "Mom," Ethan said softly, still tracing circles. "This is hard for us, too." Ryan was quick to catch the beat. "We've been covering so much for so long," he said. "We never wanted to make you feel burdensome." He chose the word with care, then pretended to regret it. But there it is, I thought. They talk about sacrifice, but they've never worked for a thing they own. Not the car Alyssa drives, bought on a month when dividends ran high. Not the summer rental that turned into a winter escape. Not the private school deposit that was time-sensitive. There was always a reason. There was always a transfer. Alyssa placed her glass down with a crisp click. "We're not trying to be cruel," she said. "This is love with boundaries." "Healthy boundaries," Ryan echoed, looking proud of the phrasing as if he'd coined it during a podcast on his commute. I looked at them both, my daughter with her expensive restraint, my son-in-law with his polished benevolence, and felt a steady calm uncoil inside me, like a long, quiet breath. After you've been holding it for far too long, I considered all the nights I'd double-checked balances, all the signatures I'd scrawled on the screen while the house was dark and the kettle steamed. They slept under roofs I'd funded, behind doors I'd fortified. They called it support when it flowed toward them. They called it enabling when they imagined it flowing toward me. Say something, Alyssa urged, not unkindly. Tell us you understand. I looked across the table at my son. Ethan? He shrugged without lifting his eyes. It's what's best, Mom. What's best? For whom? No one said. I lifted my chin and let my eyes settle on Alyssa's face, the face I'd wiped and kissed and defended against playground cruelties, the face I'd watched harden over years like wet clay allowed to dry too quickly. I understand, I said, 3 words, enough to hang the whole room on them. Alyssa blinked, thrown by the lack of a fight. Ryan, relieved, exhaled a long breath and patted her wrist with triumph disguised as comfort. Ethan finally looked up, confusion passing over his features like a cloud over water. They had braced for tears. They had braced for pleading. They had come armored for a battle that would never start. Good, Alyssa said, recovering quickly. Then we're agreed. No more carrying, Ryan added, the words smooth and pre-polished. We'll help you list the piano. No need, I said, polite as a weather report. Alyssa hesitated, some small instinct warning her there was a step she'd missed on the staircase she'd built. She looked for it and couldn't find it, and the moment passed. We sat in a quiet that wasn't comfortable but wasn't explosive either. In that quiet, I noticed the way Alyssa's ring twisted slightly on her finger when she pinched her napkin, how Ryan shifted his posture 3 times in 30 seconds, trying to fill the leftover air with authority. I noticed Ethan's hands, clean and soft, not a nick or a stain on them. The hands of a boy who'd never had to fix a thing he couldn't replace. They mistook my stillness for surrender. They mistook my silence for emptiness, the way people mistake deep water for shallow when the surface is perfectly smooth. My phone buzzed. Not the calendar chime, short, bright, but the soft, low vibration I keep for one name only. I slid a hand to my pocket, felt the hum against my palm, and withdrew it just enough to see the screen. Susan Clark, monthly transfers pending approval. Below it, a second line waiting like a breath before a confession. Please confirm to process. I let the phone rest there, screen lit, its white square of light reflected in my glass like a small moon. Alyssa's eyes flicked to it and back to me. Everything okay? She asked, managing to sound concerned and territorial at the same time. Everything's fine, I said. Ryan pushed his chair back a half-inch, a sound that would have been rude if he'd meant it. We should go, he said to Alyssa, checking the watch that glowed with the time I'd paid for. We have an early morning. Alyssa stood, smoothing her dress again. She leaned over and kissed the air near my cheek. We'll check on you next week, she said, the promise made heavy by conditions she had not spoken but intended to enforce. And Mom, don't take this the wrong way. You'll see, it's better for you. Ethan rose slowly, eyes on the place where his glass had left its damp ring. Love you, Mom, he said, barely above a whisper. And for a second I saw the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives home, lashes dark against his cheek. I know, I said. I didn't add I love you, because love is not an alibi, and tonight it was being used like one. They filed out with the stiffness of people, leaving a ceremony. The front door opened and closed. Their voices trailed into the night, and then were gone. The house breathed again. I looked down at the phone still glowing in my hand. Monthly transfers pending approval. My thumb hovered over the screen. The smallest motion would send a message in one direction or the other. A river opened, a river dammed. I pressed the side button and the light went out. The room settled into its soft, even dimness, as if the house itself agreed with the choice. Not yet, I whispered to the quiet. Tomorrow. The morning light crept through the curtains before the alarm could. I hadn't slept much, but it wasn't from worry, it was from clarity. For the first time in years, my mind felt still. No replaying bills, no silent resentment, no pretending gratitude for money that was, in truth, mine. I rose before the sun, smoothed the bed, and slipped into my soft gray cardigan. Old habits control the little things before the day can. Downstairs, the house greeted me with its familiar hush. The same house they said was too big for me, yet somehow never too big for their weekend gatherings, their celebrations, their photos. I brewed coffee the way I always did, measured, slow, deliberate. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and grounding. Then I walked into my study. The oak desk had belonged to my late husband. On it sat my laptop, a vase of half-dried tulips, and the thick silence of decision. I sat down, clicked open my files, and entered the passcode that only 2 people in the world knew, myself and Susan Clark. The screen glowed to life. Trust account, Shaw Family Holdings. Balance, $4,147. I stared at the number for a moment, not in pride, but in reflection. Decades of careful work. Investments no one believed I could manage alone after my husband's death. Years of being helped by my children, or so they thought. Every deposit, every bill they believed they paid for me came from here. Every vacation, every private school, every sparkling thing on their wrists, all of it. My doing, my signature, my quiet consent. I clicked to open the sub-accounts. Alyssa and Ryan, monthly transfer, $12,000. Ethan and Grace, monthly transfer, $12,000. $24,000 every 30 days. My allowance to those who thought I was the dependent one. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I didn't feel anger, only an unshakable calm. The kind that comes when truth finally decides to speak for itself. I picked up the phone and dialed. "Good morning, Mrs. Shaw," came Susan's crisp, professional voice. "You're up early." "So are you," I replied, smiling faintly. A soft laugh. "I had a feeling you'd call after last night." "You heard?" Let's just say Alyssa's husband is not discreet. He called one of the board members of the firm, bragging about how you'd finally accepted their decision. I breathed out slowly. "Accepted?" I said. "No, Susan, I understood." Susan paused, hearing something in my tone she hadn't before. Not fragility, but finality. "What would you like me to do?" I turned to the laptop. The cursor blinked beside the word active under both transfers. Cancel both monthly transfers, effective immediately. Susan hesitated. "Are you sure, Mrs. Shaw? That will cause some noise." "I know," I said quietly, "but let's teach them what independence means." A pause, then the faint smile in her voice. "Understood. I'll need your authorization. I'll send it now." A few clicks, a digital signature. The cursor blinked once, and then both accounts turned gray. Status, inactive. Authorization word, denied. I closed the laptop gently, as though sealing a chapter shut. The kettle began to whistle from the kitchen. I poured the tea this time instead of coffee. Jasmine, calm, steady, familiar. I carried it to the veranda, where the morning light softened the world to gold. Birds perched on the fence. The gardener, unaware of revolutions unfolding inside, trimmed the roses. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the forced politeness of family dinners, not the illusion of comfort bought by dependence. Real peace, the kind that grows only in silence after you stop explaining yourself to people determined not to listen. At noon, the peace was broken by the sound of my phone vibrating on the table. Once, twice, over and over again. Alyssa. I let it ring once before answering. Mom! Her voice was sharp, nearly frantic. Something's wrong with the bank. The transfer didn't come through this morning. I took a small sip of tea. Oh? Yes, the automatic deposit. Did you change something? Ryan called the bank. They said the payment was canceled. Canceled? I repeated softly. That's strange. Mom, please, don't play games right now. You know how many things depend on that transfer. The bills, the kids' tuition, the car lease. Her voice faltered. I could hear Ryan in the background, muffled but angry. The sound of entitlement losing its footing. I spoke gently. Perhaps now, Alyssa, you'll understand how it feels when support is suddenly cut off. Mom, what are you talking about? You'll figure it out, I said, and ended the call before she could. The phone rang again immediately, then again. I turned it face down on the table. The vibration rattled against the wood, then faded to silence. For a long moment, I simply sat there, tea warm in my hands, the faint hum of life continuing outside. A breeze through the garden, a distant dog barking, the faint creak of the porch boards beneath me. And in that stillness I smiled, not in spite, not in cruelty, but in the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. For years, they'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, my silence for submission. But today, the lesson had begun. I whispered to the empty garden, to the roses swaying lightly in the wind. Lesson 1 has begun. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for their perfect little world to start cracking. It began quietly, as most collapses do. Alyssa's calls turned from demanding to desperate. The first few messages were sharp. Mom, you can't just cancel financial obligations. Then came the pleading ones. Mom, please call me back. We just need a small advance. It's temporary. I didn't reply. I didn't even listen to the voicemails. I learned that silence was not just peaceful, it was powerful. By the end of that second week, the stories began to reach me through the grapevine. The cleaning service at Alyssa's house hadn't been paid in 3 weeks. Their gardener quit after 2 missed checks. The housekeeper posted online looking for new work, mentioning a family struggling with payments. Then came the real shock. The country club membership was suspended. Ryan's credit card declined publicly during one of their weekly dinners. The humiliation stung, not because of poverty, they were far from poor, but because image was their only currency. Meanwhile, Ethan's side of the family wasn't faring much better. Grace called once, her tone soft but laced with accusation. Margaret, the kids' tuition bounced this month. The school called. I didn't know what to tell them. I let the silence stretch before answering. I'm sure you'll find a solution, dear. You're both smart people. Mom, this isn't funny. You can't just pull the rug out like this. We relied on that transfer. I kept my voice even. You said I needed to learn independence, didn't you? Perhaps this is your turn. Her breath caught on the other end. I ended the call before she could respond. After that, the phone stayed mostly quiet, except for the occasional text that began with, "How could you?" or "We're your children," and ended with, "You'll regret this." But regret never came. Instead, I found mornings growing lighter, simpler. I began tending the garden again, something I hadn't done in years. The roses were wild, the lavender overgrown, but there was something deeply human about kneeling in the soil, trimming life back to shape. My hands smelled of earth and peace. Afternoons became my favorite time. I read by the window, the sunlight warm across the floor. I brewed tea without rush, let time move without guilt. It was strange how silence could feel like a friend after so many years of noise. Sometimes I'd glance at my phone, rows of unanswered messages staring back at me. Guilt tried to creep in, but I reminded myself they weren't starving, they weren't homeless. They were simply uncomfortable for the first time in their lives. They thought cutting me off would free them. Instead, they've been trapped by what they thought they owned. 3 weeks after the last transfer, Ethan showed up. He didn't ring the bell. He knocked hard, sharp, impatient. I opened the door, slowly. He stood there, face flushed, jaw tight. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in." He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the living room, like a prosecutor, fists on his hips. "Why are you doing this? What's the point? You're punishing all of us for no reason." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "Then what do you call it?" His voice cracked. "Grace is crying every night. The kids are confused. Alyssa says she's selling furniture to cover the mortgage. You can't just cut your own family off." I looked at him calmly. "Can't I?" He blinked, caught off guard. "We're your children." "Yes," I said softly. "And you're adults. You told me I had to fend for myself, remember? You said dependence was unhealthy. You were right. So now I'm simply living by your rules." His mouth opened, but no words came. The anger drained from his face, replaced by disbelief. "You don't mean that." "I mean every word." For a long moment, we stared at each other, the air between us heavy with years of misunderstanding. Finally, he shook his head. "You've changed." I smiled faintly. "No, Ethan, I've just stopped pretending." He turned abruptly toward the door. "I can't believe this." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I didn't flinch. The silence afterward felt sacred. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the garden glowed in the afternoon light, a little wild, a little imperfect, but beautiful in its honesty. The phone buzzed once, a new email from Susan Clark. Subject: Foundation idea. Ready to proceed? If you'd like to move forward with the charitable project we discussed, I can begin preparing the documents. It would be a meaningful legacy, Margaret. I stared at the message for a long time. The word legacy caught me. For years, I thought my legacy was my children, but perhaps it was time to build something that didn't depend on their approval. I placed my cup down, opened the reply window, and typed slowly, "Yes, let's begin." Then I pressed send and leaned back, feeling the quiet triumph of a new beginning taking shape. Not loud, not vengeful, but strong, deliberate, and entirely my own. The weeks that followed felt lighter, cleaner, like rain after years of still air. I woke up each morning, not to messages or demands, but to quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you think, the kind that lets you breathe. The phone, once a constant source of tension, now stayed mostly silent. I had grown used to the stillness, to days defined not by crisis, but by small choices: tea or coffee, gardening or reading, peace or more peace. And then one morning, a different kind of message arrived. It was from Susan. Subject: Foundation proposal draft. Preliminary review attached. I clicked it open. There, in clean black letters, was the name that made me pause. The Margaret Shaw Foundation. Underneath it, the mission statement we had drafted weeks earlier, almost as a hypothetical, providing support and dignity to elderly women abandoned by their families. I read it twice, letting each word settle. It wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real. Susan had written, "With your approval, we can launch this within 30 days. The trust will fund the initial phase. You'll remain the sole director." I smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt like sunlight after too many gray mornings. I wrote back, "Approved. Let's move forward immediately." Within 2 weeks, the paperwork was filed, the first donations allocated, and an article appeared in the local community section. Local Retiree Launches Foundation to help abandoned seniors. "No one should feel invisible," says Margaret Shaw. The photo accompanying it showed me sitting in the garden, holding a cup of tea, the same spot where I'd once stared out, wondering what my life would look like without my children's approval. Now I knew. It looked peaceful, purposeful, mine. Calls began to trickle in. Journalists, local volunteers, even small businesses offering to help. A social worker named Miriam became my first hire. She was gentle but firm, with eyes that had seen too many women left behind. Every week we helped someone new. Women living alone after their children moved away. Widows forced to sell their homes. Grandmothers forgotten by families who'd moved on. Some cried when they spoke, others didn't. The silence in their voices was too familiar. We paid overdue utility bills. We delivered groceries. We found them companionship. But most importantly, we gave them back what money alone could never buy: dignity. When the first thank you letter arrived, written in shaky cursive from a woman named Judith, I read it 3 times. I thought my life was over, but your kindness reminded me I still matter. Thank you, Mrs. Shaw, for seeing me. That letter stayed on my desk, right beside the vase of fresh roses. Word spread quickly. People began to mention the foundation at book clubs, churches, coffee shops. A few of the same socialites who once ignored me now sent polite messages of admiration, asking how they could contribute. And then, inevitably, Alyssa found out. I didn't hear it directly from her. I heard it from Susan. "Your daughter saw the article," Susan said during one of our calls. She shared it online, but deleted it an hour later. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. She wrote something first, then removed it, a mix of anger and pride, maybe. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could almost picture her, staring at the photo, torn between resentment and shame, realizing that the woman she tried to humiliate had become someone others respected. Meanwhile, her world kept shrinking. The big house was on the market, the cars sold, the staff dismissed. Their names no longer appeared on charity boards or club rosters. The people who once gathered around them began to vanish, as people often do when money leaves the room first. Ryan took consulting jobs, short-term, never enough. Alyssa started selling furniture herself, the same pieces she'd once bragged about. Grace began tutoring to help pay for the children's schooling. Ethan worked long hours, worn thin by the life he once thought effortless. From afar, I watched, not with cruelty, but clarity. Because life has a rhythm, and every arrogance eventually finds its silence. I tended to my garden, watered my roses, and sent another transfer from the trust, not to them, but to the foundation's new account. In one of my journal entries, I wrote, "When you stop feeding greed, you starve arrogance. And the peace that follows is worth every ounce of noise it took to get there." One Friday afternoon, Susan arrived at the house with a stack of documents in her briefcase. Her heels clicked softly across the wooden floor. "Everything's ready," she said, laying the papers on the dining table, the same table where my children once announced they'd cut me off. "This," she explained, tapping the folder, "finalizes the trust restructuring. Most assets are now protected under your personal authority. A new clause directs 30% toward the foundation. The rest remains in private holdings, safe, untouchable." I looked at the documents, neat and orderly, as if justice could fit into folders and signatures. Susan hesitated. "Once you sign, Margaret, this becomes permanent." "I know," I said. "That's why I asked you to come today." She passed me the pen. It felt heavier than I remembered. I read through the final lines, the legal phrases, the disclaimers, the assurances, and then, without another thought, I signed. Margaret Elaine Shaw. The ink dried fast, black and final. Susan smiled. "You've just sealed your independence." I exhaled, slow and steady, and glanced toward the window. The garden shimmered under the afternoon light. Independence, such a simple word, but how costly it had been to earn. For years, I thought freedom meant being surrounded by family. But real freedom, I was learning, begins the moment you stop begging to be seen. I placed the pen down, folded the papers neatly, and looked at Susan. "Thank you," I said softly, "for helping me protect what matters." She nodded. "You've built something remarkable, Margaret. Not everyone gets to turn pain into purpose." When she left, I walked out to the veranda, the same teacup in hand, and watched the evening settle over the roses. The world outside had changed, but so had I. And as the first stars began to appear, I whispered to the night, not in anger, not in triumph, but in peace. They took my silence for surrender, but this silence built an empire. By the time the leaves began to turn, months had passed since I'd last seen any of them. Autumn came quietly, gold brushing the edges of the garden, evenings arriving earlier, the air carrying that first hint of chill. The foundation had grown beyond anything I imagined. We had helped more than 40 women by then, arranging housing, paying medical bills, reconnecting them with family that had forgotten them. Each story left something behind in me, a small ache, a small lesson, and a small kind of healing. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I heard the knock. It wasn't angry or loud, just 3 gentle taps, followed by silence. When I opened the door, Alyssa stood there. She looked nothing like the woman who once commanded rooms with diamonds and perfect posture. Her hair was pulled back loosely, the confidence had drained from her eyes. A paper-thin tiredness clung to her face, not the kind sleep can fix. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word. She walked slowly to the living room, pausing by the piano she once insisted I sell. Her eyes lingered there before she sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," she said softly. "I open it for everyone," I replied. "You're no exception." Her lips trembled at that. She took a shaky breath. "Ryan left," she said finally. "He said I changed, that I wasn't useful anymore." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Funny word, isn't it? Useful." I nodded, letting her speak. "We sold the house," she continued. "I've been staying with a friend for a few weeks. I try to keep up appearances, but—" Her voice cracked. "It's exhausting, pretending everything's fine." Silence stretched between us, warm and heavy. "I came here," she said, "because I didn't know where else to go. I thought you'd slam the door in my face." "I thought you might not knock," I said. That made her smile faintly. Then, as if surrendering something she'd carried for too long, she whispered, "You were right, Mom." Her words landed softly but deep. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her, not the woman she had become, but the girl I'd once held after nightmares, the one who used to bring me wilted flowers from the garden and say they were just sleeping. "I didn't want to be right," I said. "I wanted you to understand before it hurt." Alyssa nodded, tears glistening but held back by pride. "I thought I knew everything. I thought money meant control. I didn't realize how much I depended on you until it was gone." I took a breath, slow and even. "We all depend on someone, Alyssa. The mistake is believing that dependence makes us powerful." She wiped her face. "Mom, the kids, their tuition." I raised my hand gently. "They're not part of this lesson. They shouldn't pay for your mistakes." Her shoulders shook as she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't deserve that." "No," I said softly, "but they do." When she left, I walked her to the door. She hugged me before stepping out, hesitant, unsure, but it was a start. That night, I sat by the window, the same place I'd once watched the world shrink around me. I thought about how loss reshapes people, how arrogance falls away when life gets quiet enough to hear yourself again. A week later, another knock came. Harder this time, but not angry, just impatient, familiar. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there. He looked older, not by years, but by lessons. His clothes were worn, his face unshaven, his voice softer. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course." He stepped inside, glancing around the house like someone walking through memory. "You haven't changed a thing," he murmured. "I didn't need to," I said. "It was never broken." He smiled faintly at that, then sat. "Grace and we're struggling. I picked up extra shifts, but it's not enough. I came here because I needed to say something." I waited. He looked down at his hands, those same soft hands that once trembled when I handed him a wrench, the same ones that never learned what work really felt like. "I told you to learn independence," he said quietly. "But I didn't even know what that meant. We weren't supporting you, Mom. You were supporting us." The words came out rough, like truth scraping against pride. I didn't rush to comfort him. I let the silence do its work. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but warm. "And now perhaps you'll learn what support truly means." He looked up, tears glassing his eyes. "I'm sorry. I know. I don't deserve—" "No," I interrupted gently, "but you can earn it." He nodded, and in that simple gesture, I saw something I hadn't in years: humility. Not forced, not fearful, but real. We talked for a long time after that, about his children, about Grace, about mistakes and small steps forward. I didn't offer him money, but I offered him something better, a path to rebuild. Advice, patience, guidance. Before leaving, he asked, "Will you ever forgive us?" I smiled. "Forgiveness isn't a favor, Ethan. It's freedom, for both of us." He hugged me tightly like the boy he used to be. When the door finally closed behind him, I sat for a while, hands wrapped around my tea, the faint warmth grounding me in the moment. My children had returned, not as conquerors, not as caretakers, but as people rediscovering their own humanity. Outside, the evening sky deepened to amber. The garden swayed in the breeze. I thought of the women we'd helped through the foundation, those who had been forgotten, and those who found their way back home. I had built something that outlived resentment, and as the last light faded, I whispered into the quiet. They thought they were saving me once, but in the end, it was I who saved them. A full year passed. The seasons turned, the roses bloomed twice over, and the silence that once filled my house had become something peaceful, not empty, just quiet enough for gratitude to grow. It was late spring when I received the invitation. A simple white card in an envelope, handwritten in Alyssa's neat cursive. "Dinner at our place, Mom. Just family. Please come." There were no fancy fonts, no embossed edges, no RSVP cards, just ink and intention. When I arrived that evening, I hardly recognized the place. Gone was the mansion with the marble counters and chandeliers. They'd sold it long ago. What stood in its place was a modest, cozy home on the edge of town, small but warm. The kind of place where laughter fits easily between the walls. Alyssa opened the door, smiling nervously. "You came," she said, relief softening her features. "Of course," I said. "You invited me." Inside, the air smelled of roasted chicken and herbs. Ethan and his wife were setting the table, their children chasing each other through the hall with giggles and bare feet. No servants, no show, just family. "Sit," Alyssa said, pulling out a chair for me. "Dinner's almost ready." The table wasn't expensive, mismatched plates, an old vase of daisies in the center. But the food was homemade, and the conversation, hesitant at first, began to flow. They spoke about their jobs. Ethan had found work at a repair shop, fixing things instead of replacing them. Alyssa was teaching part-time at a community center, helping seniors with technology, a quiet irony that made us both smile. At some point, between the laughter and the clinking of plates, Ethan raised his glass of water. "To Mom," he said, "for teaching us value, for teaching us humility." Alyssa nodded, tears forming. "We were blind, Mom. You tried to show us and we wouldn't listen. But thank you for not giving up, even when you should have." I looked around the table, at faces softened by time and truth. No jewels, no arrogance. Just people, finally real, finally kind. I smiled. "You learned the lesson yourselves. I only gave you silence long enough to hear it." After dinner, the grandchildren ran outside, chasing fireflies across the garden. Their laughter drifted through the open window, a melody sweeter than any music. I stepped out to the porch, cup of tea in hand, and watched them play under the fading orange sky. Alyssa joined me quietly, standing beside me without speaking for a long while. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. "What's that?" "Cutting us off." I shook my head slowly. "No, regret belongs to anger, and I don't have that anymore." She looked down, nodding. "I wish we had understood sooner." "You did," I said gently. "You just needed time to live the truth." A breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere a dog barked. Life felt steady again. No drama, no tension, just the rhythm of ordinary happiness. Inside, Ethan was helping his kids clean up. Grace laughed at something he said. The house glowed with a simple kind of light. Not the kind you buy, but the kind you earn. I thought back to the first night, the table, the wine glasses, the arrogance. It felt like another lifetime. In my heart, a quiet reflection formed. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. The past hadn't disappeared. It had ripened into something meaningful. Every wound, every silence, every broken word had become part of the strength that now held us together. A few days later, I sat again in my own garden. The air was warm, the roses in full bloom. My phone buzzed with an email from Susan. Subject, Foundation Milestone. Congratulations! Margaret, we've officially helped our 100th woman this week. I thought you'd like to know. I smiled, setting the phone down beside me. 100 women, 100 stories, 100 second chances. I looked up at the sky, golden with sunset, and thought life had a strange, beautiful symmetry. The people who once made me feel invisible had taught me the value of being seen. They once made me feel invisible, I whispered, smiling softly. Now I help others see themselves again. The garden filled with laughter, the sound of my grandchildren running toward me, waving flowers they'd picked from the fence. I reached out my arms and they ran straight into them. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back then, rising above the garden as the sky deepened to twilight. My voice, calm, steady, grateful, would fade into the soft closing words. Did this story touch your heart? Comment your city and share your thoughts. Your support keeps these stories alive. And the scene would close, not on loss, but on something greater, the quiet victory of love, respect, and the kind of peace that money could never buy.